Welcome to Emerging Franchise Brands, the podcast that introduces you to the visionary founders of America's fastest growing franchise opportunities. We'll also hear from industry pros as they share what it really takes to achieve the elusive milestone of 100 plus locations. I am your host, Frank Fumey, founder of I9 Sports, and my 20-year journey from inception to acquisition has given me a unique perspective on how to succeed in franchising. Join me as we welcome today's guest. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. On today's show, I have the CEO and cultural co-founder of Houndstown USA, Rob Flanagan. Rob, how are you today?
I am living the dream. I've been looking forward to this podcast, honestly, since it got booked. I love franchising. I love the emerging space. I know you do too. So I know this is going to be an awesome conversation.
Rob, I'm looking forward to it. Let's talk about Houndstown USA, on how this whole thing originated. I understand you're the CEO. So it was founded by Michael Gould. So would you share the story of how this whole thing began?
Yeah, so Michael Gould, he is the brain behind our dog management approach. And he has that founder brain. He literally sees the world the way dogs see the world. And he was one of the founding members of the New York City Canine Unit. And he really kind of found this connection to dogs. To kind of consolidate the story, he retired, created the first Houndstown as a way for shift workers, police officers, firemen, nurses, to have a place to have their dogs. Mm-hmm. And really started taking off after 9/11, when there was a lot of people, and he was part of using dogs down at Ground Zero. And he started kind of recognize that he had something. He started dabbling in franchising. And then our next founder, Jackie Bondanza, came in as a customer. And she has a beautiful story. I cannot tell it as well as she does. But she was going through a major change in her life and was in a position where she was looking like she was going to have to get rid of her dog.
Oh.
Got into Houndstown because her dog had been turned away from all the competitors. And this is one of our thesis statements. She started asking herself, what if? What if I was part of Houndstown? What if I helped Houndstown franchise? And she knew nothing about franchising. And her and Mike partnered together and started learning about franchising, going to IFA, going to the Emerging Brand Conference, and really kind of launching it to about 15 units. I came into the picture. You're going to laugh at this. I was at a random thing at IFA. Jackie walked into it. I didn't know who she was. Mm-hmm. But she had that look that we've all had at our first IFA, which is deer in headlights.
Totally.
And I remember that. And I just walked up to her and I said, hey, I don't know you. But just so you know, out of the 5,000 people here, nobody really knows what they're doing. Right, they just learned to fake it.
Totally.
And she really appreciated that. I didn't know this at the time, but she said to herself, I'm going to hire that guy one day. And I started kind of working with Houndstown pro bono, just kind of consulting. And about 3 years later, Houndstown was in a position. We had a conversation, and I was so enamored with the brand. And just as importantly, I was enamored with Mike and Jackie as the founders. They ethically resonated with my approach to franchising. And I really saw the opportunity to partner together with them to take this brand to wherever we could end up taking.
Wow, what a cool story. What's your background in franchising? How did franchising find you, and what were you up to leading up to meeting with them?
Well, you get this. It's everybody's story. Like, nobody is an 8-year-old saying, I want to be in franchising.
No, they don't.
Nobody has that story. And if you find somebody, I want to meet them. So mine is interesting. I was in grad school and I had to pick a teacher, and there was two teachers, Dewey Freeman and Diane Israel.
Okay.
I knew nothing about the teachers. Normally, I would have picked it alphabetically by last name, but I threw caution to the wind. And I said, I'm just going to randomly pick a teacher alphabetically by first name. So I picked Diane Israel over Dewey Freeman.
Okay.
Diane and I hit it off. We got along. And I needed a part-time job because beer in Boulder, Colorado was way more expensive than I was used to. And I went to Diane and I just said, hey, like, do you know anybody who's hiring? And she said, well, my brother, Robert Israel, is an entrepreneur. He just created this brand called Doc Popcorn. He's about to open his first store. I'll put you guys in touch. And so I met Rob and Renee Israel. They were dating at the time. They weren't married yet. And I was the first hire of Doc Popcorn. And it was a popcorn concept that existed in malls. It was all natural, a healthier for you snack. And I grew with Dot Popcorn, and we started franchising Dot Popcorn around 2009. And I learned franchising from the ground up. I started out as a field rep, kind of went through the ranks. But existentially, it was this world opened up to me because it was the only thing I had found up at that point, and I'm in my young 30s, that was the business part that I loved. But my challenge with a lot of business things was that it didn't always have the heart.
Mm.
And then when I found franchising, I was like, wait, here's this business part that I am enamored with, but now I'm sharing it with these blue collar, average Americans who have a dream to be free. And what I call it for franchising, and this is what we call it at Houndstown, is that every franchisee is on a journey to freedom.
Totally.
Freedom from corporate America, freedom to leave a legacy, freedom of their time, and freedom to manifest their own destiny.
Right. People think that they're doing it for money, but they're really doing it for freedom.
They're doing it for freedom.
Obviously gets them the income, but it's the freedom that they're craving.
Correct. And that's the part that it's marrying those two drivers really spoke to me. And I just became, like a lot of people in franchising, just incredibly passionate about the industry and started trying to learn everything I could, going to conferences, learning from people who knew a lot more than I do. There's still a lot more people that know a lot more than I do. And then over time, I kind of just found my niche is really, I love founder-led brands. That just really speaks to my heart. And the reason for that is there's something so magical about founders. Their brains work a little bit differently. Rob Israel's brain and Renee's brain were very similar to Mike and Jackie's brain.
Wow.
And my approach is to honor that magic, and it really is magic that they bring to the table, but marry it with the franchise infrastructure and systems so that we can bring that magic to more and more people. And there's a lot of nuances to it, but it's really kind of ensuring that that's happening. And I learned all that because I knew the alphabet and met Robert Israel through the alphabet.
Yeah. I mean, literally, you found franchising because you picked Diane over Dewey.
It's the only reason I am here. Who knows where my life would be? It changed my life. I mean, it's really philosophically fascinating how life really can change on a dime. My whole life went this different, powerful direction because of an innocuous decision. And it wasn't like I had an intuitive feeling. It wasn't like the clouds parted. I'm like, I got to go with Diane. I was like, D-I-D-U. What's the difference?
Right. Good thing he didn't spell his name D-E.
Some people do. He spelled it D-U.
Whoa. This is a close call, man.
If his parents had spelled it D-E, where would I have been?
I don't know. I'd like to think that fate does play a part in our life.
I think so too.
And you were destined for franchising. I love that you have this incredible passion for franchise-led brands, that you're able to come in and appreciate not only what they have created, but able to marry what needs to be done while still being dedicated and appreciating what they've created. I think that is
Absolutely.
not everybody can do that coming in from the outside, because some folks can walk into a company as a consultant. In your case, you came in, were you brought in as CEO immediately?
No, I came in as, we run on EOS. I came in as integrator. Then I moved into the visionary seat. So I came in, never been terribly, I think it was COO, but very quickly became president and then and I'm now in the visionary CEO seat.
Well, to be able to do that and still, pay homage to the brand and giving them what they need it makes all the difference. It's the reason why so many franchisors, I think, stall out in that emerging period, because they can't transition. It's either the founder's fault, and I say that lovingly as a founder who had the identity crisis, like me and my brand were one, but it's either our fault that as the founder, we get in our own way and we can't make it about our baby. And we started talking about that before we've recorded this here. You started mentioning it being their baby. And wouldn't you agree that it's very dangerous when, as a founder, you think of it as your baby to the point where you're almost blinded and you can't separate from what you love to what your baby really needs?
Completely. The language I use is we don't want to confuse a differentiator of the brand, which is more tactical, from the heart and the brand identity. And sometimes a differentiator gets identified as the sacred cow, but your differentiators have to expand and evolve and change and shift as a brand grows throughout the country. So we want to kind of ensure that the heart of the brand is something that is kind of built into the culture. It's built into what it is and who it is, and keep it it may be a differentiator, but it may not be the differentiator. And keeping those things kind of separate is important, because everything you're saying is what I learned at Popcorn, where there were things that we changed that, in my opinion, hindsight's 2020. I'm like, wait, no, that was the heart of the brand. We shouldn't have changed that. And I was part of sometimes advocating for some of that change. And then now that I know what I know now, it's like, no, that was the flag to put in the sand. This is who we are. This doesn't change.
Right. So we have our core values.
Things along
we have
those.
our core values. And one of those core values is typically your brand promise.
Correct.
It's something that you own. Like in my business, our core values were fun, safe, and convenient. But we owned convenience. That was our brand promise. Like everything had to be convenient. If it wasn't convenient, it was, because safety was obviously just assumed, but convenience was our brand promise. And we built everything around that. Like there was no going around that.
Yeah, you nailed it. And I think a lot of times as brands are growing, you're learning to build the plane while you're also learning to fly the plane.
Yes. Oh, that totally resonates with me.
So you're up in the air, you're trying to build the plane, you're learning to fly the plane, and it can be hard to do exactly what you just said, which is being able to identify those values, identify the brand promise. Those are things I advocate for doing in the very, very beginning. And that's why I'm such a big fan of EOS, because it really creates the infrastructure to ensure that your brand promise, your values are kind of identified and not getting caught up in a tactical decision.
Yeah. At the same time, as founders, part of our magic is the passion we have for the business. But then there's the part where we go too far. I had a mentor that once said, and he was a hard-nosed business guy. He wasn't the creative artist as most of us entrepreneurs are. He was the entrepreneur through and through. Like he'd buy and sell businesses and it didn't matter to him. He once said to me, and it really resonated, he said, don't love your business because it won't love you back.
Wow.
He's kind of right.
Yeah.
Like because we get blindsided. We love our business so much. It's a one-way street though, because your business could fail. It's not going to save you. Now, I could have total gratitude and appreciation for what my business has given me and my family and the amount of impact I've been able to have on people. But at the end of the day, that business is not loving you back.
Yeah. I love the word you use. It's our identification with the business.
Yes.
And the language I use with a lot of founders, because usually when I come in, they say, I'm losing sleep. I'm waking up at 5 a.m., 3 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And what I say is like, we want to move this business so that you're sleeping on something, not losing sleep over something.
Right.
We want to be sleeping on it to solve big problems, not losing sleep over the problem. And everything you're speaking to there, and it's so awesome. You're talking about that mentor. I love the Beatles, but it's kind of bringing in the yin and the yang. So you need
Yes.
Lennon and you need McCartney.
Totally. Yes.
You need the Gershwin brothers. Some of the most powerful things have been created as duos, so that you can have that balance of that yin and that yang.
How about you coming in to be in that balance? Did you have any fears or concerns that you weren't going to be given the latitude to do what was right for the brand? I hear that from time to time that founders, when a CEO is brought in or a president or a COO, like the torch is somewhat being passed torch to me, but am I really going to be empowered? Tell me how that felt, because there are other founders that are listening and watching this that do need to make the hire. And I want them to hear from somebody like you, who was that person that came into the company.
It's a great question. And in a way, as you're kind of using this to speak to the founder, I'm speaking to the people that do what I do. My approach is I need to earn the latitude. I have to build and earn the trust from a founder. So for a founder, this is their baby typically.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying, hey, here's my baby. Go drive it around, go do all these things, and I'm just going to be hands off? No,
Never.
no way. They need to see what this is going to look like. We need to move a little slow. We need to build trust. And so when I work with a founder, it's laying out what that looks like. And I ask the question, hey, we're going to move slow. We're going to take these steps, but we're going to move it in this direction. And I'm going to consistently be communicating with you to see how you're feeling about this. Mm-hmm. And there are going to be places where there's going to be a leap of faith on your part and a leap of faith on my part, but we're going to be in constant communication about what that looks like. I never use the approach of, hey, you just have to trust me. And if I use the phrase, just trust me, I have already failed.
That's a great point.
Because I haven't put in the program to build the trust.
So how does a founder, Rob, what can they do to accelerate the empowerment of hiring somebody? When they do hire the person, how can they accelerate that empowerment? And what were some of the maybe keys that allowed this to happen for you to really help grow this company?
Yeah, the language I use is from Strategic Coach. It's who, not how. So founder, where we want to move to in a kind of a 6-month time period. And a lot of this kind of depends on where is the brand at, how much runway do we have, where are things at. But the how is going to ultimately end up being the team's responsibility. But why we're doing it is always going to be your responsibility. And so we just want to kind of be kind of clear on the communication and how we kind of go structure that. But if we're so the strategy, hey, founder, you're a big part of that strategy. How are we what does it look like? Are we ensuring that it meets our brand promise, our values, the heart of this brand? But once you kind of sign off on the strategy, it's the team's responsibility to go execute the strategy.
Okay, true.
And so kind of being able to kind of understand the roles and responsibilities that the founder is. And I see a lot of my role when I do come into that brand, again, it's when I use analogies, when you look at a like a horse race, the stallion often has a friend horse that's kind of behind the scenes, but is lining up the stallion or the founder to go do these amazing things.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want the stallion or the founder to be so caught up over here because it takes up their brain energy to be that creative force.
Right, right.
So we want to take all these, Rob Israel, this is what he would say. He's like, my brain has 1,000 gigs of RAM memory. Like everything is in my head. And it always resonates. My job is to take those things out of your RAM memory so you're not bogged down in it, keep you informed, consult you on the things that are really critical, but free up your RAM memory to go be your amazing self, because founders are magical. And we want that magic because that will help drive the brand forward.
Yeah. One of the dangers I've noticed with just businesses in general, this is not even franchising, is that if the entrepreneur has the ability to wear so many hats and do so many things, it has actually hindered their growth because they can, versus somebody who just says, I flat out can't do the marketing. I can't do the sales. I have no idea. And those people hire earlier, quicker, and so they get to scale faster. So it's actually a detriment to the founder if they're too good at wearing too many hats. If they're the quintessential 5-tool player, like in baseball,
Correct.
That actually hurts a founder.
It actually does. Yes. And it's understanding just because you can doesn't mean you should. Yeah.
Right.
And even if, let's just say hypothetically, founder has a robust experience in real estate. They're an expert at it, subject matter expert. Well, you don't want the founder doing that work, not just because of the executional element, but because in franchising, when the founder ends up being so accessible to the franchisee in such a critical stage, you're setting up the franchisor-franchisee relationship to be upside down. And so like I say with founders, I want you in my back pocket for when things are going really well or when something has just amazingly hit the fan and I need the heavy to come in. But I want you to be on those. But if the franchisee is working with you in real estate, you are no longer, I can no longer, put you into the system in the appropriate way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Rob, so tell us sort of what was the magic for you when you came in? There was 18 franchise locations and now you've taken it to, there's 75 locations open. You got 55 more that are in development. I guess I understand there are multi-unit operators that have the right that they will be opening in the future. That's an enormous amount of growth in a relatively short period of time. What's been some of the the magic behind that?
Yeah, well, I'd like to be clear on this language. There is no, it's not me. I bring my part to the table, but it is the team. And there is an amazing team here, starting with the founders, myself, David Martinelli, our president, Scott in ops, Amanda in marketing. I mean, it's the team all the way down to Cooper, who does our local store marketing manager stuff. It's a team effort. What has helped with that growth is that a line I often use is the founder is often looking to bring in that team. I hate to say too late, but too late.
You're right. You're right. More times than not, it is too late. I think part of it, I can only speak for myself, it's not that I don't want to, it's can I afford it?
Yeah. The language I use there is a lot of times a brand is hiring to cash, not hiring to growth.
Right. That's a great point. The other thing for me, Rob, this happened to me where I knew I had to bring somebody in for franchise development. I was selling the franchises, of course, the first couple of years, which I loved, and I do love it. Foundationally, I love it for founders that they get to hear what candidates are asking, that they have their finger on the pulse when it comes to Fran Dev. If you can do it. Not everybody is, of course, a salesperson. That was my background. So I knew I could do it and I loved doing it. But one of the big ahas for me when I knew I needed to hire a VP of franchise development, which I was scared to death. It was going to be my first real big boy hire where I was going to pay significant money. And when I was thinking about hiring this person, I remember, the base salary I think at the time was, oh gosh, it was about $100K, which scared me to death. And I had a friend that said, why are you worried about paying $100,000? And I said, well, I don't know if I'll have $100,000. And they said, are they going to be there an entire year? You're going to pay them $100,000 to sell no franchises? And I was like, well, no. And they said, in 6 months, you're going to know whether it's working or not. So think of it as a $50,000 investment, not a $100,000 investment.
Great way to look at it.
That changed everything. And if you think about it, the only thing that changed was my perception now. That's all it was, because it still was the same amount of money. The other line is,
I may not be able to afford it, but I can't afford not to.
I would have been out of business. And in my case, I would have ran out of runway before I would have had more competition. So I think sometimes you need that fire under your butt, to make that change. But it is scary when you're a bootstrap founder.
Yeah. Every franchising or not, there is tremendous change in your brand going from a handful of franchises to 100. Tremendous change. And change is always nuanced and difficult. And it certainly has its multiple layers in a franchise system. And so if you come in at 50, you start building the team at 50. Well, that's 50 locations that you may have to be putting in a lot of changes. Versus if you're able to kind of start more proactively analyzing the changes and the evolution that you're going to need, so you're putting it in sooner, there's less of the change. Now, even knowing that, your Houndstown has gone through tremendous change over the past 3 years. All those changes are all set to position the company to be as strong as possible for the future. But at a minimum, like we put in a new point of sale machine that is always very hard to do. But we did that at store 30, 28, 27 versus store 75. Still hard, still challenging, but a lot less challenging than doing it today.
Sure. It goes back to the whole theory of really making sure you have your act together and your systems and processes in place before you award or sell too many franchises.
Yeah.
It magnifies the problems if you don't have your stuff together.
The brand is constantly pulling on two levers that are also at times working against each other. Any brand is looking to gain market share. Every brand is. If you're in a sector that is highly competitive, well, that drive to gain that market share is probably needs to be more aggressive. But the more you're looking to go gain that market share, the more you need the infrastructure.
Right.
And those are kind of working against each other. Now, if you happen to be, you've created, I'll make this up. This is not the case today. You're the first frozen yogurt concept ever. Maybe that was TCDY.
Right.
But you're the first one. Look, people are going to be coming out behind you. That's business. But you could argue you don't have to be as aggressive because you're first to market.
Right.
You still need to be aggressive, but maybe not as aggressive. But if you're you're a restaurant, you're a sandwich shop, you're whatever, look, that's a highly competitive space. It's a rush to real estate. And you have to kind of measure that ability to do that. And all that ends up tying to your ability to capitalize what you're looking to grow in the franchise concept.
Sure. Now you're talking about the external pressure of growing. What about the internal struggle or the push-pull between the home office and franchise owners? Because that's the internal pressure that we all contend with. It's
absolutely,
are we all rowing in the same direction? We don't always agree on everything on how we're going to do something. But Rob, tell me about some of that experience on how do we navigate the relationship with our franchise owners when we're growing, because it becomes there is stress that's put on the brand as we get bigger.
What I advocate for is we call franchise sales franchise recruitment. And in the recruitment phase, speak to the stages of growth that the franchise brand will be going through. So, hey, you're looking at the franchise brand today and it has 25. This is what it looks like. Now, I can't guarantee what it's going to look like at store 75, but I can certainly be transparent about how it's going to be different. So, hey, store 25, guess what? You may be talking to the founder.
Right.
You may be calling the founder with that problem, but store 75, I will say, if you're calling the founder because you don't know how to use the point of sale machine, there's some bigger problems within the brand. So it's kind of laying out and managing the expectation for people that are coming in saying, hey, like what you're buying today, it is going to look different from a systems perspective in 3 years, 5 years, so that you've laid out the roadmap of where the brand is going. And here is how you will be part of that franchisee on that roadmap. We're going to be doing this together. We're going to be doing this from hopefully a sense of partnership, but here's what it's going to look like. Here's our 3-year picture, and here's what it looks like. Because the individual that you attract to your franchise brand at store 15 is a very different individual from the franchisee you attract at store 100.
Sure, right? More risk averse in the beginning.
Absolutely. They like it. They like that there's not a lot of systems.
Right.
They love that.
Sure.
But the franchisee you bring at store 100, they expect that system. And then the franchisee at store 15, now at store 100, and there's more infrastructure, there's more systems, my joke is there's a form for that. It's not just picking up the phone. They may not like that.
Right. No, they generally don't, because there was a freedom that they had earlier on.
Yeah.
I wish somebody had told me that when I started franchising. It never occurred to me. Of course, I didn't even know what I didn't know when I started in franchising, but I wish I had even known something as basic as your first 10 franchises or first 25 are going to look nothing like your 75th to 100th franchise. It's a different profile of a person. And it would have made total sense to me if somebody would have explained it to me that I'm going to be further along. And the person that's your 100th franchisee, well, they're obviously, don't want to take on risk. So they're going to be more, they're going to have expectations, but your earlier franchisees, they're going to have no problem with the risk of it. They're going to like that.
It's a spectrum. In the very beginning, the brand tends to be very localized.
Right.
Hey, can we try this? The founder, understandably, is like, I don't know. That may work.
Sure.
Let's try it out.
Right.
It's not a formal testing process. It's like, oh, let's try it out. But as a brand, any franchise brand grows, it's going to grow to less localization and more standardization. And here's what it looks like. Now, like anybody, I like to always communicate the context and the why behind that standardization. And so the franchisor's role is to raise unit volume, increase unit profitability. And as you do that, the brand expands. And there's the asset value grows for the franchisor and the unit level. And part of that asset value is when the franchisee will sell their business, which is hard for them to think of in the beginning. But the business will sell. It may be 50 years from now, and maybe their grandkids that sell it, but it will sell. And the value of that business looks very different in a 50-unit franchise versus a 500-unit franchise.
Sure.
Very different. The asset value is tremendously higher in a healthy 500-unit franchise. And so it really is tying all and communicating all of those drivers, which all should lead to your mission statement, your vision, your just cause, whatever the brand is calling it. It should all be leading up to that. But we are all rowing the boat in that same direction. But the boat is going to look very different here in the beginning than it does here. Right. But the boat is always rowing in this direction. It's expanding the brand's promise, expanding the brand's vision, 10-year target, and increasing the asset value for every franchisee. I tell every franchisee at our confirmation day, nobody is in this room to run a nonprofit.
Right. True.
Absolutely.
That's right.
There's the heart of what you're looking to create. We're a dog
Right.
brand. There's an amazing amount of heart.
Sure.
And
And it's a business.
it's a business
right.
to provide a profitability.
Nobody quit their job to do this for free.
Correct.
Yeah. Since we have Rob, I know a lot of folks in our audience that are looking to buy a franchise, become a franchisee. I'd love to get your take on if, since this is emerging franchise brands that I feature for the most part, what do you think a prospective franchisee needs to carefully look at? What are some of the most important elements when they're looking to become a franchise owner of a newer brand?
Yeah. So it looks a little bit different depending on, are you more attracted to what we were talking about, that early stage franchise versus a more mature franchise? If you're looking at maybe a younger type of system, the questions let me kind of even go high level. Randomly got into doing this. A buddy of mine from high school was looking to buy a franchise. He was like, can you help me out? I wasn't a broker in any capacity. It was a flat rate. And I just helped educate. And then he had a friend, and then he had a friend. And what I've always tried to do is like, well, these things I'm pointing out about other brands, I need to have in my brand.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I always start is really getting into that item 19 and understanding it can be completely legal, but it may not be as transparent. Why? And so a brand that is putting everything or as much as they legally can in their item 19 is a really, really positive sign to me. Because now I, as the person buying it, have more information to be able to look at it.
Right.
The other thing I advocate to folks is when you're going through peer review, validation, whatever the brand is calling it, do they only have people there that have been open for 10 years, 7 years, 8 years? Or do they have a cross section? They got the really mature folks. They got the people open 3 years. They got some people only been open 1 year. How is that kind of structured?
Mm-hmm.
Then look at the leadership team. Are the people that have been disclosed in the FDD, and you can look on their websites and kind of see who's working there, go on LinkedIn. Are these folks that have been there and done that for 5+ years? Or are the people that are really driving the day-to-day of the business kind of junior to what's happening? Now, that's not a red flag, but I would be asking the founder, hey, what is your plan and timeline to build out this team at a minimum to kind of understand where those are at? I'm then looking at the market. How competitive is the market? How well is the brand marketing their differentiators in the market? Because I'm going to be the one running the business in Omaha, Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's 3 other concepts that have been in that market for 20 years and I'm the only new guy going in, what's the marketing plan about driving it? And then I'm also really kind of getting under the hood as much as I can into the support that the brand is providing.
Sure.
Yeah. And I know I gave you a ton of stuff.
Yeah. Would you ever buy a franchise that did not have an item 19?
No, never. No.
And I'm thinking back when you and I started in franchising around the same time, about 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So 2003. I remember that the statistic was like 20% of all franchisors did an item 19 in the early 2000s. And now I believe it's over 60 or 65%.
It's very high. Yeah. And I should kind of provide that caveat. If it doesn't have the item 19, then when you're going into peer review validation, then those franchisees should be providing their P&L statements.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to get some sort of visibility on the unit economics of the brand. But yes, that's one of the things I've certainly seen change dramatically. Almost every FDD I look at today has an item 19 of some sort.
Yeah, I can't remember the last FDD I saw that didn't have one nowadays. It's even though I think the stats about 2/3 that do. I don't I haven't seen any that don't.
Yeah, I haven't.
There's too many brand choices to begin with. If you're going to buy a franchise, why would you buy one that's not going to establish what you could potentially make, or what the financial performance representation are, as opposed to going in blind? I couldn't imagine. There's too many options. I want to ask you, as a franchise expert, a couple of the statistics that I love to ask about and get your take on. Why do you think that 84% of all franchisors never get to 100 units?
Yeah, it's one of the most important questions, I think. And if you're looking at franchising, everybody hears about responsible franchising, which I'm, of course, an advocate for. And a lot of times what ends up happening in the emerging brand space, it's not being responsible. It's didn't know what they didn't know. I think one of the largest reasons is that the person who's kind of created the brand, the founder, doesn't fundamentally understand that franchising is a growth strategy to grow their brand. Right. You could get venture capital, you could get private equity. You could go to your friends and family. My founders make the joke that their friends and family are poor, so that wasn't an option. It's a growth strategy, and it has its pros and cons, just like any of those other growth strategies. The pro is that for the founder is they maintain a much larger part of their equity stake and have more control over where the brand's going. But it's just a growth strategy. And often the founder not as experienced in the finances of running a business. And they don't understand cash and how it's separate from profitability. So they may look at a checking account and they see, I have X amount of dollars. Yeah, but some of those dollars could be your launch fee that you're going to have to spend in 6 months.
Right.
Or, you just sold that franchise agreement, but it's a broker deal and you got to send 50% of it out here soon anyway, or whatever it may be. And so it's really understanding the capitalization that you're going to need as you go into franchising. And 5 years ago, the number was you needed access to $1 million. I think that's too low today. I think you need access to $1.5 million to $2 million, not all at once, but kind of over a 3 to 5 year period. You're going to need that kind of capitalization to be able to grow your brand appropriately. So that's one. Second, we've kind of touched on is hiring to cash, but not hiring to your growth. And so founders are, again, so unique. You can almost drop a founder into any situation and they're going to figure it out like within 4 days. But not everybody is that way. They need 6 months to get onboarded and learn the brand and kind of do these different things. It's a different type of person. And so you need to be hiring 6 months to a year ahead of where you're going to be at that point. And ensuring that you're doing, I see a lot of emerging brands start out by hiring, I'm going to hire this franchise manager they've been part of Dunkin' Donuts for 3 years, and I'm going to hire them. And I'm not saying that's a bad hire, but that individual is not going to have the strategic experience that you need. Yeah. I advocate as much as possible to bring in at a minimum somebody with a minimum of 5 to 10 years of experience in franchising that can help build that infrastructure as early as possible.
Yeah, otherwise you become a victim of what I did, and I think a lot of emerging founders do, is you just carry over your team from your company-owned location, your first flagship, and everybody's like, well, we're franchising, come aboard. And we're all of a sudden all in the franchise business, and nobody knows what the heck we're doing other than how to run that one location. Because we know training somebody on how to run a franchise and be successful is completely different than running a location. But we typically just take everybody, a whole team over. It's not until we grow up into hiring somebody with a franchise background or some sort of expertise that has how to relate to people who are investing in your franchise and how to train them, because you're no longer in your business anymore. You're now in franchising. I know we've said that many times on the show before.
Yeah. A question I'll got, and I say it very respectfully. It's like, do you know how to build a house? And most founders are like, no, I've never built a house.
Right.
Okay. So would you just go start trying to build a house on your own? No, you're going to go hire a general contractor. You're going to hire somebody who knows how to build the house. And what you're going to do is kind of be the voice of what the house will look like, but somebody else is building it. It's the same thing with franchising. You're building a house, but if you don't have that experience on how to build that house, you want to go hire people who know how to build it. But a lot of times people think it's easier or not as nuanced as it is. And so they go start trying to build a house. It's like, oh my gosh, it's falling over. What's happening? You call the general contractor. It's like, well, you don't have a foundation. You don't have, you're not up to code. All these different things.
Right.
So,
yeah. No, going back to what you were saying about financial literacy, I want to circle back to that, because it is a problem if you don't understand how to read a P&L and balance sheet and a statement of cash flow. You need to know where your money is going, and the bigger the business gets, the more dangerous it gets, because you're now speeding in a Ferrari now, and not in a little go-kart.
Correct. And I think a large part of that is there's so many fractional services nowadays. Very reasonably, you can bring in a fractional finance person, even if you can't hire them full time, but bring that type of person in to help model out where your business is from a cash perspective.
I think that's probably one of the top hires an emerging franchisor needs to make, is that fractional CFO.
Agreed.
Somebody has to more than just manage the money. They need to be helping plan and strategically focus on what we're going to be using money for and what we really need, because as you said earlier, you're going to need more than you think. There was you're going to need more than you think. Legendary founder, the late Fred DeLuca from Subway. His number one rule was... I have a great
Fred DeLuca story for you.
Oh, I'd love to hear it. Fred's quote is, "Don't run out of cash." That's his his number one rule. What's your story with Fred?
It's such a testament to who he was. My first IFA, it's embarrassing on me. My first IFA, I'm sitting outside of some session that's supposed to go. This individual sits down next to me. He's like, "What do you do?" I'm like, "Oh, it's my first IFA, doing this popcorn concept. What do you do?" He's like, "Oh, I run a sandwich franchise." I was like, "Oh, okay." I'm so embarrassed. He was like, "Yeah, we're kind of dealing with this kind of situation." I sort of gave him advice.
Oh, good.
And it was very humble advice. It's like, I don't really know, but here's what we're kind of doing. I was just trying to be helpful.
Aw.
You know who he was. Like going to the session and they say, "Here's Fred DeLuca, the founder of Subway." And then that guy moves from the seat next to me and walks, and I'm like, oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
Outside of my own ineptitude, it is such a testament of what I have seen in franchising is the humbleness.
Yes.
And I say this sincerely. I so appreciate what you're doing. It's coming from that giver's heart. It's coming from the sense of humbleness of saying, here's what I've learned, let me share it. And when everybody and more and more people in franchising do that, then we help that number be from 84% and make that much lower by making this information available to individuals.
Yeah, I hate getting caught up in that number. And I talk about it a lot on the podcast. And I don't want to make it about the number that you have to get to 100 locations, because we know it's really about being royalty self-sufficient. That's ultimately, the ultimate goal. So you're not drowning and trying to keep the lights on by selling franchises like I did for a couple of years and almost being bankrupt within like months away is my story. And too many of us have done that. But it's, you want to be able to sustain for the long haul. And the only way you're going to do that is having happy franchises that are obviously succeeding. I know we use that 100 number because it's a kind of rule of thumb. You got to need to kind of get to 100 usually to become that royalty self-sufficient, but people get to it much earlier and sometimes even much later if you're really not careful with cash, I guess.
Yeah, well, it ties to exactly what you were speaking to before, and it's a shift I've seen. I'm not anti FSOs, franchise sales organizations, not anti them in any capacity. But as a founder, understand how much of your cash is going there to help you sell. And that FSO can because they're really good at what they do.
Right.
They can sometimes overextend you on that side of it because you're not getting as much of that cash. So
Of course.
I'm not saying do it or don't do it. I'm just saying that's a decision. The language I use is some decisions you can unwind really easily, make those quickly. Decisions that are tough to unwind, take your time on them. And that's a decision to think through with your financial person to understand the cash implications of using an FSO.
Yeah. Well, I want to take full responsibility for this publicly. That when I first started doing the podcast and I would talk about the growth of a franchise and say, oh yeah, the FSOs and the brokers, and they're to blame for this, why we're talking about responsible franchising. And then it really dawned on me, that's not even fair. Did me as the founder, did they hold me at gunpoint to do business with them?
Correct.
No, I hired them. Now, when you're starting out again, you don't know what you don't know. And when somebody calls you and says, we can sell 40 franchises in your first year, and you don't know what you don't know, you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. But at the end of the day, come on, this is a full team effort. It's not the FSO's fault. It's not the broker's fault. It's me. They didn't hold me at gunpoint to A, hire them, and B, if I felt it was so dangerous, I could have hired somebody in-house.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to use brokers. And I used brokers on and off. I didn't have a whole lot of success with the broker groups from my concept, but I think everybody shares in the blame on why this term responsible franchising has come to be and why, they're seen in a negative light. I don't think it has to be that way.
I completely agree with you. They have each part of franchising is its own channel or leg of the stool, whichever way you want to describe it.
Absolutely.
But it is ultimately our accountability and responsibility to understand how to put those legs together.
Yeah. Rob, I know we're kind of running out of time here, but I have so much to talk to you about still. We could do like another hour of this. Let's talk about the future and kind of what you see as how franchising is evolving. How do you foresee the franchise landscape evolving over the next 5 to 10 years? And maybe that has even changed with now the political climate has changed now as well for franchising.
Yeah. The language I'm using is a gentle overthrow of how we do things. And I don't mean that because we're doing things poorly, but I really do like the language of like, how do we self-regulate and create more transparent franchise things that we do so that you don't need other agencies regulating everything.
Sure.
And so I see a lot of movement in that direction. It's this conversation about an item 19. It's a conversation about that. Those are really powerful. And I look forward to more and more of those. And I'm very appreciative of IFA also leading a lot of that dialogue. And I think that's really critical. The second thing I've certainly seen, and you had in one of your pre-questions, is the role of private equity and franchising is at a completely different place than when I first started out, for sure. And like anything, I don't think it's good or bad, but I do think you have to think about it differently as a founder, because you certainly 10 years ago could bootstrap your franchise brand to 100, 150 locations, for sure. Not saying it was easy, but you could do it. Now, there's going to be a likelihood that the competitors in your space have got the private equity
Right. So even if you didn't sell the private equity, your competitor did, and you're dealing with bigger dollars that you're competing with.
Yeah. You could have the best sandwich ever invented by man or woman or by human, and your three other competitors' sandwich is good, but not as good as yours, but they have the private equity.
Mhm.
They're getting into the market sooner. They're putting in infrastructure more quickly. And that's something that has to be really considered and thought through for a founder, is just how that role of those dollars are working within your sector, for sure.
Yeah. Kind of tying this together, since obviously work for a founder, what are some of the factors you think are really important for a founder to consider when it's time to sell the company or maybe take chips off the table? Do you have any opinion on that?
Yeah, I start that conversation early, and you want as a brand to be dictating that process, not find yourself in a situation where you're like, I have to go do this or I'm going bankrupt. So run the business as if you're going to sell it a year from now. Always, always. Understand what an investor or institutional capital looks for, and use that as a roadmap to how you create the infrastructure and systems and how you organize your information when you're going to go into that process. So you're driving the dialogue, not the other way, ideally. The other language I use is, would you rather own 80% of a $5 million company or 10% of a $10 million company?
Great point.
And I may not have done the math exactly right there, but it is certainly emotional for sure. But as your brand grows as a founder, and the same goes for me, what the guiding principle has to be what serves our franchisees. Because our franchisees are also our investors. It is not as traditional, but their capital is being used to grow the brand. So if we strategically need that capital so we can invest in things that grow average unit volume and increase unit profitability, then those are things that absolutely should be considered and typically need to be considered sooner than people think.
Great point. Great point. Rob, I've been enjoying talking with you.
This has been fantastic. I'm geeking out.
A three-part series at the least. But I'm gonna let you go here. I want to ask you two last questions. One, if someone was interested in getting more information about Houndstown USA and maybe opening a location, where would they go?
HoundstownUSAFranchise.com. You can also go to HoundstownUSA.com, and there's a link to the franchise space. I'm on LinkedIn. My email is rob@HoundstownUSA.com. And any emails, LinkedIn, any of those places are great first steps to get more information.
Awesome. Okay, I have a last question, and I've called it the franchise tip jar. But you, sir, are season 3, episode 1, which is being released in January. And so I want to have a new tip jar question for the year.
Okay.
And so here it is. If a close friend came to you and said that they were interested in buying a franchise, what would be maybe one piece of advice you would give them to absolutely ensure that they were making the right choice?
Are you ready to bring your soul into deep waters and grow more dramatically as a human than you probably have ever in the past?
Wow. Very good. Well, that's deep, man.
I came out of nowhere.
That's fantastic.
And to me, that's powerful.
Right.
But what I've seen so often in franchising is there's the franchisee learning to be the business person, but it also pushes them as a human. It pushes them as a soul. It pushes them outside of their comfort zone, which is incredibly powerful. And I get the honor and blessing to be part of that journey for the franchisee.
Mm-hmm.
But for any franchisee that's looking at any type of concept, it will, if you've never run a business before, you're going to grow in terms of your business acumen, but you're also going to grow as a human.
Yeah. And many of them, at least in my concept, this was their first time owning a business.
Absolutely.
And I've heard that, I hear that concept after concept, a lot of first time business owners. And that's the other thing that's great about franchising is if you're going to go into your first business, at least buy something where it's a proven concept and you've got the support. So you're not starting from scratch. We all know those crazy statistics on how often businesses fail. You don't need to have that working against you. And that's what makes franchising so great.
And I think that's what's so important for everybody in franchising is understanding we can go, myself included, I'm guilty of this. We get so caught up in the systems and the operations and the tactics. Mm-hmm. Just as important is the sacred responsibility we have as franchisors to create a business model that creates that freedom.
Yes.
And I shared this story at a conference, and I know we got to go. But very early on in my career, I had this franchisee. I don't have any favorites, but they really touched my heart. Mm-hmm. Blue collar, Boston group, saved up their money. They're in their 60s, and they had this dream. And also, just as powerfully, they had a son who had pretty extreme special needs. And they wanted not only this business for themselves, but they wanted their son to know how to work, because he wasn't able to go work in another traditional company. And it was beautiful. They opened, they were doing well, they were so happy. And for 3 or 4 years, it was such an amazing story. And they were open next to a Sears, and the Sears closed. And they did everything they could. They worked well with the brand. They put in the taxes. They did the marketing. They got out in their local market. They did everything they could. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, without that Sears there wasn't the traffic. They had to close. Mm. And my job at the time was I had to go out there and help them close. And they invited me to their house for their dinner. And the wife, I remember it to this day, it's so long ago, but it's like it was yesterday. The wife goes into the kitchen, and the husband is this traditional Boston guy. Very stoic, probably had only cried twice in his life, when his son was born and when he first saw Old Yeller.
And when the Red Sox won the World Series.
And when the Red Sox won, yes. So maybe 3. But I'm telling you, he's not teared up. He's visibly choked. And he's looking me in the eye and he's saying, Rob, what am I going to do? We put everything on the line. There's no blame across the board. We knew what we were getting into. It was great. But what am I going to do next? And I didn't have an answer for him. And I flew back home, and I'm a pretty even-keeled person. I don't have high highs, low lows, but it shook me to my core. I was like, I don't know if I can do this franchising thing. That is that's an emotional weight that I don't know if I can hold. But then I thought about the 20, 30x stories of where it did work. And I want to be part of those 30 stories, those hundreds of stories, thousands of stories of people that gain that freedom. But what I share with that story is that every franchisor should never lose sight of the humanity of what we do. Mm. The humanity is just as critical as the unit profitability and the sales. They're all tied together.
For sure.
And there is that sacred responsibility to that humanity of what we do. And it is a blessing for anybody in franchising to be able to be part of those individualized stories.
Wow, that's wonderful. I hope that if there's a founder out there that's maybe thinking of franchising their company, I hope the big takeaway is not to have fear of going into it because of that sacred responsibility we have, but you have no idea how much of an impact in a positive way you're going to have on so many people. You have no idea. Most of us go into franchising because we love our business and we want to expand our business, and franchising is that vehicle. And you have no idea, though, the ripple effect of it. And yeah, there's going to be good times and bad times, but man, there is nothing like the positive impact we can make on people's lives that we weren't expecting. And with that said, Rob, Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate what you're doing. It's very important.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad our paths finally crossed.
I
can't
know.
remember how many conferences we've been to. We never met, but at the IFA in February, hopefully you'll be there. I will be there. We will meet up in Vegas.
Absolutely.
All right, man. Well, thanks again. I appreciate being on.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fumey, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.